It's the start of a new academic year at Cass, the only time in the year when students actually feel rich, when perhaps students can give to charity, because the latest research by Professor Cathy Pharoah, who specialises in charitable giving here at Cass, is that it's rich people who make up the majority of a charity's coffers. I asked her to tell me more.
Rich people do give more in absolute terms. Because they have higher incomes, they tend to make larger gifts. But that doesn't mean that the proportion of their income that they give is always higher. And we found there was considerable regional variation in the amounts given to charity. And most of that variation relates to the different wealth levels of the different regions in the UK.
Presumably the reason poor people don't give as much is simply that they don't have as much money.
Poorer people give as much as they can, I think. They do have less to give. And in fact, we find the proportion of households that give to charity is higher amongst the higher income bands. But perhaps there are also factors around how much opportunity poorer people have to give. Charity fundraisers tend to focus on the wealthiest regions in the UK, and it may be that they're not looking to see how much money they could raise in some of the other places.
But even if rich people are giving more as a proportion of their incomes, presumably still the majority of a charity's funding comes from people lower down the income scale.
Yes, I'm afraid to say charities do depend quite heavily on the gifts of the wealthiest people. In fact, in terms of participation in giving, we find that 3 times as many people in the top 10% by income give as those in the bottom 10%.
You also found out something very interesting about remittances. This is where people send money overseas back to where they originally came from.
Yes, Britain has quite a lot of migrant labour, and those populations tend to give directly back to their families and communities, and not always through formal organised charities. So it was very interesting to look at their patterns of giving too. And we found that the amount of remittances sent abroad from London has actually decreased over the last decade, but it's increased hugely in the eastern regions, and we think this is because of the whole shift of labour to the eastern region, where there are opportunities to do vegetable picking, fruit picking and that sort of thing.
Because these are people who are at the very bottom of the income scale.
Yes, and it is an example of just how strong the impulse to be generous and share and support others can be.
Because very often the money they send is a huge proportion of their income.
It's a huge proportion of their income, yes. They make very big sacrifices to do this, and it isn't all to their immediate family, it's their extended family and their communities.
What was the biggest surprise for you in your research?
The biggest surprise, I suppose, is the level of variation between giving in Northern Ireland and giving in the UK, and the huge difference that involvement in a faith can make to the amount that people give. Now, this could be partly because of their values and partly because of commitment, but it could also be that when people are involved in a faith, they tend to attend an institution regularly, and this means that they have terrific regular opportunities to give.
What are the lessons for charities that come out of your research?
I think the most important thing is for fundraisers and charities to realise that there is considerable variation across the country in how much people are giving. Giving is quite high in Ireland, and we think that's because there's a very strongly faith-based community in Ireland. It's also quite strong in northwest London. That could be because of higher incomes, but it could also be because of the presence of some strong faith-based communities, such as the Jewish community in North London. So charity fundraisers have to take into account this kind of regional variation and think about why it's occurring. Is it all down to wealth, or are there other things they could be looking at, such as the number of charities in the region, the opportunities that people have to give?
Professor Cathy Pharoah, thank you very much.